On there. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go through the two scripted questions that we sent out in the mail to each of you. And we reduced the time down to 2 minutes. I know that's a challenge, but just 2 minutes to try to stay focused on there. Otherwise, we won't be able to get through that many questions. Now, the first question has to do with the county intangibles tax, which maybe not everyone's familiar with. There is an intangibles tax, and it's really a voluntary tax. Because if you don't file for the county, they don't come and collect it. There's no method for tracking it. I contacted the county, and they said they actually get about $250,000 a year in the intangibles tax. The county also has several years of delinquent property taxes. How would you propose to enforce the intangibles tax, or would you repeal the intangibles tax? And then secondly, what can be done to speed up collection of delinquent taxes? And we'll start with you.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Tell me.
Well, on the intangibles tax, first, I disagree that it's a voluntary tax. It is by your submission, but the Form 200, it says if you have intangibles income, you must pay. So it's a case of good people doing what they should do and paying it. It's $300,000 last year. It's right at $271,000 has been collected this year. Only $4,000 has not been collected. $190 is budgeted for next year. I would continue to support the tax because that's $500,000 in the county's budget. And also, we've already submitted it. Your April 15th, 2012 submission was for your 2011. So those taxes are already in the vein. They'll be billed in December, and so we have time. The other key thing about the intangibles tax that I honestly don't know about and would require a meeting, especially with the 2nd District Commission who's elected there, is that Leonardville and 9 of the townships have intangibles tax in addition to the .075 tax that the county itself has. So those entities would have to be brought into the hearing process and understand what they use that money for and what they need it for. On the delinquent taxes, quite simply, some folks in town are gaming the system. The interest, the procedure for collecting that money and the interest, all that's stated by state statute is 7% interest. So there are people who will not pay their taxes because they know they've got 3 years by statute to clear the bill, so they're just letting it out. I tell you to watch the August paper. I keep mine. I've got it in the back of the room from last August. Do business with people who pay their taxes. It's as simple as that. And know that when it ultimately goes to sale, we're getting the money back. So it's a cash flow item.
You ready? 2 minutes is a short time, and I'm like Scott. I'm used to using my hands to talk, but basically, I concur with Rod on that. I did some checking into it. It's they just figure a $250,000 average, but it'll vary some. And the intangible tax, initially I was opposed to it years ago because I was led to believe it was a tax on a tax. Well, I found out that it isn't. And the .075 on the interest of your money is what it amounts to. $250,000, $300,000 isn't chump change. And when I visited with Eileen King, she said basically the people that use CPAs, I talked to Roger Sink, and the people that use CPAs, they have reports from the state yet. And primarily people with interest in those larger incomes, it's probably pretty well paid. So I'm in favor of keeping it on because the people that may not pay it may not have little, if any, interest, and I don't think that it warrants going after that money. So I would suggest leaving it as it is. On the delinquent tax, there again, I talked to Clancy Holman, and the homestead, you can go 2 years without paying your tax, and of course on the rest of the property it's 3 years. So that's state. So there's not much we can do about that other than I guess if we raise the interest rate. But my opinion is too that watch the paper. I always thought that the people that were in there we're wanting everybody to know how much property they own. That's just a guess, but the bottom line is, I don't appreciate that. I pay mine by December 20th in full. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, my wife just came in. If you would stand up, Allison. This is my wife, Allison Boyd. I've seen her at the bank, huh? I agree with Rod and Ron on the intangibles tax. It is absolutely necessary for the small towns in our community, in our county. It is a vital part of their budget. It is a tax that really is not administered, or I shouldn't say administered, it is not regulated with threats. And we can improve that. We should be able to improve that. But it is the amount of interest that is required before you incur intangibles tax is pretty substantial. So I'm in favor of continuing on with the intangibles tax, but I would like to make it a much easier administration, and that calls for working with the state to get that done. The delinquent tax, we're going to get the property, we're going to get the tax. People are taking a 7% loan, and that seems pretty expensive to me. I concur. We got to identify these folks, and if there are business owners, don't do business with them. All right, thank you.
Well, I agree with the rest of the fellows. I mean, they've pretty much explained the whole thing as far as the tangible tax. As far as the delinquent taxes go, I really think that as a county, we ought to make the people pay that tax by year instead of waiting 3 years. I think that would be a lot better way of collecting the money, and who knows what the property is going to end up being looking like after 4 or 5 years waiting for the money for it. And it might not be worth the tax that we collect on it. So I'm in agreement with that.
Who says there's no agreement in American politics today? We all stand up here agreeing with everything that we're talking about taxes, no less. So I'm in agreement with everything that's said. To be perfectly honest with you, the intangibles tax, I appreciate Commissioner Butler offering the question, because I learned something today. So, and it seems like from the research that I've done and the people that I've talked to, it's a big part of the problem is coming down from the state is they've taken away the enforcement mechanism, and so that people, if they don't know that they're supposed to pay it, they don't know that they're supposed to pay it, and it essentially just doesn't happen. But it's also a fair point that a lot of the people who aren't aware of it probably aren't in situations where they're having a great deal of interest in the first place. So I'm certainly open to looking at repealing it. I think my gut instinct would probably be to agree with the rest of them, but it's something that I think warrants further research. And if it gets to the point where it's more of a trouble than it's worth, then that's a road we need to be open to going down. But I think at the moment I'm not going to be beating down the door to repeal that. As for the delinquent taxes, and this is the issue with so many things, is I think if we can just enforce the laws that we have, we're probably going to be in good shape. I know if you talk to my father in Topeka, he could rattle off a list of 10 different people that haven't paid their property taxes in 20 years, and nobody's done anything about it. And so we need to avoid situations like that. And I think for the most part, like everybody else has said, a lot of the people who end up with their name in the paper are not people that are struggling and just can't afford it. They're just people who, for whatever reason, aren't paying their property taxes. But there are a number of people out there that I think maybe are just struggling, and so I think there's room for some leeway. But for the most part, as long as we enforce the laws that we have, those chickens will come home to roost, and I think we'll be okay. So, thank you.
Okay, the next question, Ben sort of...
I know we've had consensus, but in the interest of time, I also think that we should probably support the intangible tax as it is. It is, whether it's $250,000 or whatever it ends up each year. it's money that I sure as heck don't want it to have to, if it goes away, I don't want to put it on your property tax very bad. And somebody would have to figure out how to replace that if that income was lost. As far as the taxes for people being delinquent on their property taxes, I think they should pay them, and I think that we have the mechanism in place, as been pointed out, to go through that process. And I too read the paper and do look at the people that are delinquent and with interest. So I think that it's okay to. It's there, and some people are going to be late, and they'll pay the consequences.